Hello, everyone. Today, I'm very happy to have a longtime returning guest, Daniel Braum. Welcome back to the show, Daniel. How you doing?
Doing good, guest and viewer here. Great to be
Yeah,
back. Thank you.
my favorite viewer. Um, you're my favorite guest, though, and I mean that. I love
Thank
talking to
you.
you. Uh, but and we were talking before the show,
Yeah.
and we were having a conversation about this being the month of cryptid, and I was talking to Dan here about Bigfoot, and I was saying that it's kind of hard to prove that Bigfoot exists because we don't have any hard evidence. We don't have like a body to study to see what type of animal this like belongs to in the animal kingdom and whatnot. And Dan, he said, "Ask me about that in the interview." And so I was like, "Okay, you know what? This is going to be the icebreaker."
All
So,
right. I'll take the
okay,
question.
yeah, like go for
Yeah.
it. Like, what do you got?
No, we got no reveal, no body. Right. I think
Do you have
I
something
love watching.
in the
Yeah,
kitchen, like
in a
maybe
cooler. I love watching.
in the
I
cooler?
love cryptids. I do follow all the trashy news stories that come up. And like, yeah, like maybe it was during the pandemic time or maybe before. Like, I think one of the Bigfoot hunters, he was like made like an announcement. He's like, I have the body in the cooler. And I think I'm a skeptic. I kind of want to believe, and I really believe in the possibility of cryptids, but I'm also a skeptic. And like you said, yeah, there's at this point, I think it's going to take a body to prove any cryptid, especially a Bigfoot. But I guess the reason why I'm a skeptic, leaning towards believing, in that having a primate or an undiscovered animal out there seems to be within the bounds of science, right? Like in the early turn of the century, mountain gorillas were a thing of myth, right? Like until we had the technology to catch up with them, and there's always an animal that's extinct that's like for 20 years it's just popping up on someone's trail cam. So
Yeah,
so I kind of believe that. So what was the question? The question was, uh,
just
oh
finding
yeah,
the evidence of
the evidence.
Bigfoot.
Yeah. I was watching a cool documentary. I think it was on Amazon or Freevee, and I forgot the name of it. But it was some Bigfoot hunters or Yeti hunters. I think it was more in the Yeti that I thought they had some really interesting evidence. And as interesting as the evidence was, they concluded the reason I thought of it was they said at this point, no matter what evidence we have, and what they had was some video and some motion analysis, some hair, some DNA stuff. So it was pretty interesting, but not definitive proof. But I think they concluded by saying, in order for science to really say that something's out there, we need to have a body. So
Yeah,
it's a fun it's fun to check out, and it's also a fun path in fiction, as evidenced by Cryptid Read Along Month, which is
yeah.
sounds fun.
It's something I like to think about every so often. Your story there kind of reminds me of I can't remember the exact name of the incident that happened, but it was involved Russian uh, track and fielders. They would like ski across country during like really bad weather conditions, and they like to go out in the middle of winter and Yatslav Pass, I think, something like that. And
That's sounding familiar. Yeah.
they disappeared and they were all found dead, unfortunately. But the circumstances of the behind their deaths were interesting because it looks like they tore out of their tent in the middle of the night, quite possibly. Half
Oh,
of them were found naked, and they were all found different. Some of them looked like they had the crap beat out of them, like and it's never been completely solved. Although they think that we think it was a certain type of avalanche that got them. Um, but it's
mm,
still hard because some of them are crawling back to their camp and they were like just in their underwear and it was like -10, -20. I can't even imagine what that would have been like.
wow.
And then there was four more found like 100 yards away from where the others were found, and they were all in like a line, and their faces were all crushed, and it looked like something
Eesh.
just pummeled them, right? But so there's of course
Ice
so
and
there's a
snow
lot of
and
people who are
ice and
like,
snow
yeah,
rock. Yeah.
they're like it's either aliens or Yeti.
Yeah. Well, I prefer the Carl Sagan. Extraordinary claims require the extraordinary proof. So,
Yeah, and it was the
although that,
Datlov, I think, the Datlov Pass or something like that.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
that's that.
it certainly sounds scary to contemplate being beaten up by wild creatures. It's pretty frightening
Yeah,
to me.
yeah, exactly. So, how have you been lately, Dan?
Doing good, working hard, and yeah, just really excited about just some great stuff happening out there in horror. So feeling good about it.
All right. So, lately I've been talking to a few people on the show, and one of them you recommended to come on here, and that was Louisa Collin,
Oh
and
yeah,
I really thank you
book.
for that because we got along famously. I felt, and she has something similar in common with you, in that Cemetery Dance picked up one of her books. Now they decided to reissue one of your books, and it was done a little while ago. I think like beginning of October, right?
Yeah, the Serpent Shadow, which I think this is what you're talking about. Let's get it.
Yep.
Yeah, that came out. Yeah, like late. Yeah, September, October, and that was it was only out as an ebook, and it got picked up by the trade paperback line. And yeah, that's how Louisa came on my radar as well. I was looking at the Cemetery Dance releases coming on, and her excellent book Bad Moon Rising came out, and I was fortunate enough. Louisa read. Actually, we talked about real life ghost stories at the Serpent Shadow launch was hosted by a Ghost Story event in Brooklyn. So Louisa was one of the ghost storytellers, but she's going to be back on my YouTube channel with Robert Levy and Ben Francisco for Krampus Knot, and we're going to talk about our own stories then. So,
That's
yeah,
cool.
great book, Bad Moon Rising.
Very cool. Now, how did you get connected with Cemetery Dance?
Wow, that was a long time ago. I'm a slush survivor. I think 20 years ago. Yeah, I sent. They get thousands, literally thousands, I think, of slush. And no joke, like in the early 2000s, I was submitting to them, and they pulled from the slush. My first short story from them was Across the Darien Gap, which it's in the Night Marchers and Other Strange Tales now reprinted, which is another book. That's my collection from Cemetery Dance. But yeah, and I was fortunate enough to have other stories with Cemetery Dance, and when they started their ebook line, I was fortunate enough that they asked for me to do a collection. So incredibly fortunate and lucky connection with Cemetery Dance.
Awesome. Now, I've talked to you about this book before, way back.
Yeah.
In 2019, I think.
Yeah, when the ebook launched. So
Yeah.
it'd be fun. It'd be fun to like ask like the same exact questions and see how diametrically opposed my answers are.
I should have did that just to see. But there's quite the possibility that I'll ask the same thing anyway. But I remember talking to you about that on the show. It's the first time we talked, and it was on the Darkness Dwells podcast. We discussed. Actually, this is actually one of the questions I'm pretty sure I asked you before, because the novella involves traveling, and there's a small family who travel to Cancun. And I was asking about how much you yourself travel, because it comes out in your work. Have you ever visited the Mayan pyramids as described in The Serpent Shadow?
I have, as a youngster, which was really the inspiration for this, and then at various points, again as an adult, but really as the first real travel that I ever did as a preteen was to that area with my family, like our first family vacation that we were able to have. It was actually gifted to us, and yeah, so it was a really inspirational thing for me, like your first major travel like that, and to be thrust into well, not so much thrust, but to have the opportunity to be in proximity to such a vastly different culture. So the Yucatan Peninsula, on the surface, Cancun, it's like the most touristic place in the world. You know, if you stay in the zone, it's these vast hotels and very homogenized kind of things. But just literally just outside that lighted path, there's there's a whole different world. And I was a preteen that liked to be rebellious and get into trouble. And very quickly, the trip was just a real eye opener to me. And um, that must have planted the seeds for a sense of horror and a sense of wonder when I eventually, years and years, decades later, came back. I think a lot of that stuff was, while not direct lines, but like the influence of it, of a family and a teenager being in proximity to things that seemed like magic was definitely an inspiration.
Yeah, I can only imagine being there at that age, and talking with the other kids who might be there, because this story is not only a pretty horrific story, but there's also like this sort of magic situation going on between our main character and a young lady that he meets while he's there. That I was drawn to that because I know I would have been a lot like the protagonist, meeting other people there and just kind of falling for one of the girls.
Yeah, and I think that's just part of the sense of wonder of life and the time of life. Yeah, when you're that age, your world is just exploding and ballooning, and you just want to, kind of like that Smith song, where I want to see people and I want to see life. There's just that that feeling of everything's exciting, and especially to meet, to meet people and to meet other kids your age from um, other parts of the world is definitely um, part of that real world magic.
Yeah. I also want to discuss a little bit of the Mayan culture that you sort of delve into, especially in regards to the Mayan ruins that takes place in this story. How much research did you have to do in order to get like the facts down, at least into the story's concrete uh, pathology?
Well, I hope it comes across as respectful, even if it isn't 100% accurate. I feel like that's what's most important to me. So, because I feel like that's what makes good fiction. If it has a verisimilitude or it feels real. So, I'm not sure if any of it is on point because I didn't do any or much extraneous research other than what had already just been um, preloaded into me. What is real, or what is real, is the situation going on in the Yucatan, and maybe that was a bit of a research that I learned. Um, Now that AI is in the news, artificial intelligence, one of the first commercial uses of artificial intelligence was done back in the early 1970s, where a conglomerate um, of hotel consortiums use fledgling artificial intelligence to determine the best site for investment. And it was on the Yucatan Peninsula. And as in the early 1970s, the Yucatan Peninsula was a quote unquote lawless area. Lawless meaning that the state, the province, was rebellious and didn't feel to be under the auspices. It didn't feel to submit to the Mexican government rule. So it was very partisan, very indigenous. So the indigenous people and the Mexican people, which to an outsider might seem the same, or you might not even think about it twice if you're a certain sort of person, but there's a real war going on, a real political, actual war, and also a war of culture. So, starting in the 1970s, this massive multinational, multi-billion-dollar business, I can't afford to stay in Cancun or some of these areas. Really, there really was a real war of sorts going on, and as a young preteen, just getting the whiff of that from the different people, was really mind expanding to me, and yeah, was it again planted the seeds for some good fiction.
How long did this story uh, live rent free in your head before you decided to write it down? Because it seems like it's been there for a long time.
I think it had been there for a long time. I think I can't even think of the years, but I'd have to say decades, because the image that lived rent free. There there's human chains. There's in the story. There's a part of the magic is people linking hands and making these sort of like long human chains. And for whatever reason, there's there was something called Sock Bay, which are white roads, these kind of brick roads that connected the Mayan cities. And without having it being tied to a story, that was just something that always just sort of inspired me as just magical, as just being like, wow, or mysterious. Like, yeah, there are these white roads that connect, and they were probably completely mundane and earthly, such as, yeah, it's this massive, advanced and technological city. So of course you're going to have roads, but yeah, to my young mind, and it just the magic and the purpose of that, I think lived rent free in my mind until it that was the first thing that actually the story began to coalesce around. But quite some time.
Cool. Now, before I asked you to do a reading, and we're going to have two readings tonight, and the first one's going to be from Serpent Shadow. But before we get into that reading, would you mind telling us a little bit about? Well, first off, set up the reading itself, and maybe tell us a little bit about what the novella is about.
Yeah. So what the novella is about, it's set in the 1980s in Cancun, Mexico, and it's one of those stories. It differs wildly in tone and setting from a movie like It Follows, but it's one of those horror stories that is, when you start to peel the onion, there's more than meets the eye. It looks like, I don't know if there's vacation horror or tourist horror. It looks like sort of cabin in the woods horror, in that, yeah, there's young kids, and like Jason had said, they just want to hang out and have fun, and oh, they're gonna get into trouble. Oh, and then the supernatural comes, and that's pretty formulaic. And yeah, we all that has its place, and yeah, we all love that. But at first it masquerades as that, and then very very soon in the story, you see that there's more than meets the eye, that these relationships and those setups, what's really happening is there is a supernatural war between the Mayans and the Mexicans, and it revolves around two things. The Mayans and Mexicans are both trying to use this supernatural power, so we say, of summoning what they think might be a kaiju or a giant monster or a Quetzalcoatl-like creature to influence the direction of Mexico. And the other thing that's happening is there are murders happening, like a serial killer murders on vacation on Christmas week. And the rumor, the innuendo, is that it is Saint Death, Santa Muerte, who is committing these murders, which is a patron saint out of Mayan folklore. And enter our, as Jason said, our young narrator and his family, David, a young New Yorker who just stumbles upon it all.
All right. So, so if you're ready, we can go into that.
Yeah,
All right. So here's Daniel Braum reading a passage from his novella, The Serpent Shadow.
thanks, Jason. Yeah, so as a bit of the setup, I'm going to read from the middle of the book. And what has happened is David and Anne Marie, the young woman that he had been so captivated by, they had went out into the jungle, and they had a strange experience. They had seen one of these rituals that attempted to summon the strange creature, and they just didn't know what they saw. So um, this passage is the two of them taking that apart, where there's something magical more than just the spark of young love happening between David and Anne Marie, and there might be more going on with Anne Marie, who is not originally American born, than meets the eye. And that's a little passage that I'm going to read from. Anne-Marie slung her bag in the corner. We went outside the ruin and sat with our backs to the wall like last night and watched the sea. Regina and Heinrich laughed and smoked a bit. Then from the quiet, I guess they had moved on to making out. Anne-Marie and I held hands and listened to the sound of the ocean. Sitting with her was nice. I could really get used to it. The best part of the day had been sitting with her atop the temple before everything had gone mad. It had all happened so fast. I wanted to know what she thought of everything that had happened. I can't get over all those people this afternoon, I said. Yeah, she said. 1 second it was just us, and then, wow. She didn't say anything. What are you thinking? I asked. Nothing, really. What happened today? I said. What do you think everyone was doing? Doing? You know. I thought you understood, she said. You don't? I do, I said. I think I do. She looked at me skeptically. They were all praying, she said, as if I should have known. For what? For a miracle, she said. So they asked for a miracle and they got a flying snake? It wasn't a flying snake, she said. It looked like a snake. Wait, are you saying it wasn't real? No. Are you? She said. No, I know what I saw. Looked like one of those tree boas Ramon showed us, but all big and grown up and with crazy red wings. But I keep asking myself, could it be a hoax? Nah, it wasn't, she said. Yeah, it was too real. So come on, what happened? What do you think? She was quiet. I could tell she was really thinking it over. She had that look about her that Regina had when she was doing calculations in her head. She alternated between being lost in her thoughts and looking at me, sizing me up, I thought. Then she spoke. Okay, if you're asking me, I thought we were looking at the end of the world for a second. What? Come on. Didn't look like the end of the world to you? I'm serious, I said. I'm serious too. Now you sound like Ramon. Please, no, she said. Ramon was incompetent, unprepared, and incompetent. Unprepared? That's a weird way of putting it, but yeah, I guess. You were there, she said. Are we having the same conversation? Of course we are. Wait, you really don't get it. She laughed, but she wasn't playing around. She had figured something out, but I didn't know what. I'm so stupid. What did the jungle say to you? I shrugged. I know it called to you, she said. On the beach when you fell, and when you took my hand on the pyramid for sure, probably other times too. I remembered I had seen buildings when I had fallen on the beach. There were resorts and roads where the jungle and the beach had been. Good, she said. Tell me. I think I was seeing the future, I said. In the future, Cancun just gets bigger and bigger. And on the pyramid, when you took my hand, she was right. I had seen something when I took her hand. Now I remembered. I saw you. And Ramon, no. I was seeing through your eyes. I was linked to you and to everyone else. Who were they? Mayans, she said. The lost, the left behind, those from which all has been taken, those who know hard work. Why is it so hard to remember? I don't know, she said. This seemed to concern her. Maybe people who can't deal with what they've seen simply don't, and they forget or explain it away. Was I doing that? You remember now? She said. Yeah. Good. Now remember what we were all looking at. A snake, I said. A giant snake in the sky. That was what I had seen. That was what I had forgotten. On the beach, at the pyramid, last night at the ruins and in our room. It all came back to me. Good, she said. I knew you were one of us. You knew it too. The snake, I said. What is it? I don't know, she said. I really don't know what it is, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that I know that it's ours. A huge set of waves crashed on the shore. The white bird from last night called from somewhere. Ramon said something about a serpent god. She laughed. Gods? Really? Do you believe in gods? No, I guess not, I said. I only believe in what we can feel and see and touch, like the jungle. The jungle I believe in. She was right about the jungle. I had felt it as soon as I arrived in Mexico. I could feel it now, outside the hotel zone. Breathing, waiting, reaching. Given time, it would take back Cancun. Now tell me, why the jungle called to you, she said. I wasn't really sure it had called to me at all. Was I being a phony if I told her that it had? Thought about it for a second. Being here made me think about who I was. Seeing the jungle and the Mayan people and the poverty made me feel different. I couldn't really explain it, but I knew I was going to look back on this trip as a dividing line in my life. My father, I said slowly, he came to the U.S. when he was a boy, alone, with nothing. His parents were refugees. The first chance they had, they sent him ahead. And Marie listened, as if what I was saying was the most important thing in the world. Only they never came. Dad was raised in foster homes till he went out on his own, real young. Most of his family, my family, was wiped out before I was born. Where they were from, where I'm really from, I guess, is just gone, World War II. Doesn't feel like I'm from anywhere. Dad took us upstate most summers. He had a little cabin in his place with people like him, people who'd been through it. That's as close to a homeland as I have. Your homeland was taken from you, she said. I tried to say more, but I choked up. I never felt like anything had been taken from me, but growing up, there was always this nameless sense of emptiness. Dad grew up in foster homes. His stories about when he was young were all awful, even though they were gilded with humor. The places in our life where our family should have been were empty. No cousins, no photos, no extended family gatherings. You see how Dad filled those spaces by working, by keeping our basement stocked with supplies, too many supplies, and just things. Just in case, he'd always say, it wasn't normal. There was a rifle in a case on the top shelf of his closet where boxes of his photos should have been. At some point, we were starting using the supplies without replacing them. One day I remember checking for the rifle and it wasn't there. I never saw it again. Mom started having enough money to buy us clothes from stores. I remember Dad's tears when he told Regina that she would be able to go to college, and the tears when he said we would be going on vacation as a family. I wanted to tell her all this, but the way she put her hand on my arm, I knew that she knew something akin to it. She'd lived a life like Dad's. She had no one to give her the life Dad gave to me, the life Tomasito dreamed to give to his son. The jungle called me because I'm my father's son, was all I was able to say. What if you could make it right? She said. You can't. What if you could have what was taken from your family? How? I said. You can't change the past. You just can't fix things like that. But you can make them right, she said. If you could. Would you? Of course. I thought so, she said. Is that what the jungle said to you? I asked. No, she said. Tears welled in her eyes. To me, it said, welcome home. We'll stop that bit right there.
All right. So that was very good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Serpent Shadow is one of my favorite novellas. And One of my favorite things about your writing is how you can incorporate nature, especially like the sky, the night sky, stuff like that. Um, is this intentional? Do you like, or is this how you just set up a scene?
Um, wow, I'm not sure. I'd like to say it's intentional because setting is a big part of my process and my inspiration. So it's been a while since I thought about setting up that scene, but um, yeah, nature and the setting and the sense of place is something that's important to me as a reader. Like I like feeling transported. Um, I like just that sensory aspect of it. So it makes sense that I would want to. It's probably my favorite part of writing that I would want to have that present in there. But also, a lot of my work deals with the relationship between the setting and the supernatural. So I feel like I always, especially in this story, I always want to make sure that it's present.
Awesome. Now, to switch gears just a little bit, I was wondering about your writing process a little. And I'm wondering what's your favorite part in the process of writing a story from beginning to end? Like from conception to when it's out there in the world.
Wow, if I get to pick having it out there in the world, right, that's kind of a cheat, right? Like, well, what's your best part of writing? When it's finished, right? Like, isn't that like the
When it's
cop
done.
out answer? When it's done, yes. Here we go. Um, but I see where you're getting at with that question. Um, the In terms of the nuts and bolts and the art and the craft of the writing, I'm a big I'm big on revision. The hardest part for me, or at least it used to be the hardest part for me, would be the first draft. So I would
Hmm.
tend not that I don't want to say I didn't like it, but it would be the hardest for me because like I'm the sort of writer that I have to write 100, no joke, dozens and dozens and dozens of drafts. So if you look at my first draft, it's just me getting the story out of my head onto a piece of paper. And I pray that people don't find these first drafts because they'll be like, he is not a human, he is an ape. He is clearly writing ape words. It's just like it's just whatever it takes, like notes, put the sky here, go to just it's just total chicken scratch, whatever it takes. And then once I get that done, then I feel like okay, I got the tiger by the tail. I can make it happen as long as I get through that first draft, no matter how shitty it is. Then I can make it happen. So yeah, a great piece of writing advice is by the great Neil Gaiman, who says all a first draft has to do is be finished. So I'm a big believer in that.
Yeah. Are you the type of reviser who will like eliminate characters because they're not really contributing, or add a character because there needs to be a character in a certain spot?
I'll do whatever it takes. I believe in whatever it takes to make the story happen. Kill another. It's another cliche piece of writing advice, but kill your darlings. Right. Sometimes I think that's what you're getting at. Sometimes what we think was the inspiration is just not working on the page, and if I get wind of that, yeah, I have no problem killing the darlings if I feel it's what it needs to be done.
Now, going back to that Neil Gaiman quote that you mentioned, there's nothing more important than completing that first draft. Do you ever find yourself getting kind of stuck, but you plow through it anyway until you reach the end?
Um, yeah. A similar. I don't find myself getting stuck, but for me, sometimes in my life I've been not stuck, but just shut down. So I think there's um, I think a good bit. Well, I hesitate to say what's a good bit of advice because a good bit of advice for me could be a crappy bit of advice for you, or a great bit of advice for the both of us could be a shitty piece of advice for what anyone's thinking. But that being said, I'm a big proponent of showing up, and both sometimes it's both showing up when you're stuck, which is like a piece of writing advice that I give to people when they ask me about writer's block. I say, um, well, just show up and just commit to, no joke, just commit to one word or one sentence a day. And that sounds like a kind of goofy bit of advice, but I feel like if you can just show up for that, protect the time, protect the space for that, it's like the equivalent of lighting a candle in the darkness. It's the equivalent of like when there's power out, just lighting the just lighting the pilot light on the burner. And I guess I'll say another bit of Neil Gaiman advice is he says, so yeah, I think sometimes plowing through, even if you're not feeling it, could be good advice. Because again, Neil Gaiman says he's a big proponent of finishing your drafts. And he says, we learn things by finishing them. And I see the wisdom in that too, right? Like if it's between having all these unfinished drafts and finishing them, yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned. But that being said, I hate the tyranny of advice. I hate the tyranny of like, that doesn't sound right to you. If you're a new writer listening to that, and that's bullshit. That's fine. The only advice is what works for you. And I think the most powerful voices and the most original stuff come from not following the pack and not following advice just because somebody said it. So I always want to say that.
I think that Neil Gaiman quote is good advice, though, because you can't get anywhere without a finished product. And one reason why I asked the question I did is because I have a lot of unfinished manuscripts, both short stories, novellas, and novels, that I just abandoned because it got stuck somewhere or life got in the way and I lost interest or whatnot. I think, for me anyway, it's important to finish what you start.
Well, I look at that. It's a tragedy of not finishing them, but on the other hand, it's a dragon's treasure. If you say you have a lot of stuff, like to me, if I had a lot of stuff, I would just be like, oh my, that's treasure, right? Like you get to now finish all that stuff, and to right, because like the hard part for me is like the starting, right? So I'm just like, wow, like I'm kind of a little jealous, like wow, you've got all this stuff to finish. I'm like, ooh. What fun! So I wish you fun and good inspiration in delving back into those when your situation allows you to.
Well, lately I have been finishing what I've started, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, for
Now,
sure.
I know you have like weird times of when you're awake and when you're asleep. Just by communicating with you on Facebook Messenger. So I'm wondering, what time do you prefer to write? Do you write in the mornings or at night, during the day, afternoon?
I don't. I I don't. I'm so like adrift right now, like in between the pandemic and certain health situations, and I'm just so adrift. So like, I guess I prefer to write. I guess if I had like my utopian, you know, with a quiet mind and just like a quiet, a quiet, perfect situation, with this. But I'm saying that with tongue in cheek because I'm also a big proponent of writing when it's not optimal. I used to love to write in airports. And I don't know why. Like I guess I was in school and it was so busy, and like the only free time I had for myself was like going in between, like on these breaks from school. And so that time was so precious to me. So like I just couldn't fathom just like staring into space. So that was at one point in my life, that was when I got my writing done. At another point in my life, someone asked me like, "Hey, can you write more than one thing at once? Like not obviously at the same time, but like while you're writing a short story, can you?" And I was like, "I don't think so. I don't know." And like some other questions, like, "Yeah, can you write when people are talking? Can you write when?" And I had never really written in public or in coffee shops. So all these things that I sort of tested myself with, and got comfortable with. So when do I prefer to write? I don't know. I'm just like I don't really know, but I just know like when I'm not a person who writes every day unless I've got the time or I've got the tiger by the tail. And the Serpent Shadow was a time in my life when I did have time, so I was able to have like a rhythm of writing every day and writing the same point every day. But that changed or that could change. I don't think there's any wrong or right way to do it. It's just getting it done, and also just and getting it done and showing up for it, like making it happen. Whether you spin gold, and some people spin gold, they spin it, they write the first draft, and it's like, yeah, don't change this. I don't spin gold. I have to like really work hard on it. But yeah,
Yeah,
um,
that's like Caitlin or Kiernan. I know that
mm,
they're a perfectionist, and they in a sense, like while they're writing the first draft, and it has to be perfect before they move on to the next paragraph, for example. And so when it's done, it's done. I don't know if that's the same way it is now, but I remember her talking, or them talking about that on a Facebook post like 5 6 years ago. I can't write
yeah,
that way myself.
they're going through it. They're going through those massive revisions on a sentence level or a paragraph level. So yeah, to
I
us
wish I
Morris,
could write that way, and
it seems
write
like
the
it's a
way
great goal.
they do, because that is incredible. Like the stuff they put out is just like
Yeah,
so dense and like wow, like
I recently read some of my first readings of their work, and I was impressed at at both the sentence level of the prose, and the absolute visceral darkness of it. I was impressed.
yeah. So speaking of other writers, I was wondering, and novellas, because we were talking about Serpent Shadow. I want to know if you have any favorite novellas that you'd like to talk about.
Wow, what pops into mind is the Ballad of Black Tom
Oh, that's
by
a good one.
Victor Laval. Wow, what a great one, huh? I guess,
Yeah.
and also I almost choked for a second because I'm like, oh my god, I can't, I don't know if I've really read too many novellas. I think novella is having its heyday. That when I first started writing novella was A Kiss of Death, that length, but now
Hmm.
I think there are a lot of, and when we're off the air, I'll probably remember a lot. I'll probably remember a lot more of them. As a kid, I remember I loved the Stephen King novellas,
Oh yeah.
the four, obviously both the Bachman books and I think the four, with the Green Mile and that. So yeah, I mean, but you would have to like King is in this category. It'd be like, what's your favorite novella other than King? But yeah, the Ballad of Black Tom is just absolutely groundbreaking, monumental, incredible work.
And it's absolutely brilliant. I mean, there's basically two stories in one, and the way it's written is just mind blowing.
Mm,
It's definitely one of my favorites too. And
yeah, yeah, it's
I
really inspiring that book.
I have to say it was unfair of me to ask that question because if anyone shot me that question, my mind would just go blank, and I'd be like,
It's okay, but Ballad of Black
yeah,
Tom popped back in because I was just like,
yeah.
bam, it just occupies that space where it's like, yeah, it's so good that it's just like it's so great you can bring back the joy of reading when you're a writer sometimes. Um, yeah, you kind of do, but also as a writer, it's inspiring just to see the skill of Victor Laval. He truly is one of the best.
Yeah, for sure. So I was wondering, what do you read more of? Do you read a lot of short stories, or do you read a lot of novels?
Um, short stories, short stories. I find it hard, at least as a grown up, that I'm a so-called grown-up now. I find it hard to read novels. The having the time, or the time just in life's time constraints, and more so the headspace when I'm writing. I'm really in it. So I've always loved the short story, but yeah, now definitely the past decade, it's been, the ratio of short stories to novels is greatly shifted to the short story.
I'm glad you said that, because my next question was, who's your go-to short story writer lately? Who do you go to the most?
Wow. I don't know what go to means, but if you want to go to the top,
Yeah, like
who,
who do you like? Who do you, if you're like,
who's the,
I need to read something, like, do you
if
ever
I need
just?
to say like, easy answer, and that is the great, the one and only Kelly Link.
Oh
Uh,
yeah,
Her book, I always get the color, the color now. I'm not sure if it's black dog, white cat, black dog, or whatever the name of her most recent collection. But there are stories in there that are just unbelievable. One of my new favorite stories is her short story called Skinder's Veil. I think it was originally published in Ellen Datlow's Shirley Jackson tribute a couple of years back, and it's
Yeah. Okay.
reprinted in her collection. And I look at that story, and yeah, it's like Ballad of Black Tom level, sky high. I read that story, and it's so fun to just read on like a level, like all the joy of like reading is just like, yeah, that's so great. And then just seeing what it is, it's like, this is a story I always wanted. It's like, this is a story I always wanted to read. This is the kind of story I wish I could write, and it's just amazing. A bit of a footnote on that is, if you like audio books, the audio version of that is read by, not even read, performed by Patton Oswalt.
Oh,
Patton,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, so it's great. It's just a great story, and if you like audio, there's a great audio book of it as well.
I love Patton Oswalt's stand-up comedy.
Oh, you might get a kick out of hearing this one then.
All right. Well, I promised you about halfway. I think we're well over halfway now. But if you need to take a break, we can take a break if you'd like.
Yeah, I want to just very, very quick break. I'll step away from the camera for about a minute, and I'll be right back.
Absolutely.
Okay, be right back.
This is where I get to stare at the screen and look creepy. How's everyone doing out there? Also, I want to mention that if you have any questions for Daniel Braum, feel free to type them out deep down there in the darkness, and we'll get to them before we stop. But I have a few questions left for Daniel here, and then we're also going to be doing another reading from a short story of his that was in an anthology recently, and we're going to be getting to that very shortly. All right, Daniel's back. Welcome back.
Thank
And
you.
I was just saying there before you're gone, this comment here from Joseph. It's like, doing creepy, great. And I said, this is the part of the show where I get to stare at the camera with a creepy face. And I was like,
let's have a creepy contest.
But then I was just telling I asked people to ask questions if they have any, and I was just laying down what the rest of the show is going to be like. We're going to move into a short story you recently had published in an anthology called A Darkness Visible. Can you give us a rundown of what that anthology is? Like, it seems to have an interesting concept behind it because of the subtitle.
Yeah, it's a real interesting anthology. The subtitle of it is Explorations of Horror in the Postmodern. So the publisher is Ontology Press, and it's co-edited by 4 editors: G.M. Miller, Ewan Moore, Lara Taffer, and Justin Burnett. And they wanted an anthology of postmodern horror. And I just recently did a. So what is postmodern horror? I'm not an academic. Brian Evanson, the author, he's a great author, and one of the contributors gave a great answer to that, and it's slipping my mind. But to a layman like myself, they were just looking for horror that's different, looking for horror that is not bound by the conventions of horror. And I guess what I mean by that is, there are no rules, but there are only rules that are just sort of in our own minds. Like the only rules for what horror is what our own expectations are, So like, I don't know, like, at least that's what I think it is. So I think what these editors were looking for things on that fine line that still felt like horror, but in some ways also felt like it was expanding or things that were unexpected. I wish I'll go back and look on my YouTube channel and the contributors. I had a chance to talk to some of the contributors. They give really great, more academic definitions of it.
Yeah. Um, your story in this anthology is a bit of a mouthful. It's a Loch Ness monster under the light of the Southern Cross. That's the title, and we were kind of. I remember when you typed the title of it, and I was like, "Wow, that's quite the title." And you said that a friend of yours once said that they compared the titles of your short stories to bad Yes song titles
Yeah,
from the
it sounds like this one's more like
1970s.
a. It sounds like this is more like a good Ronnie James. I think sometimes I'm a Ronnie James Dio fan, so I think sometimes I mess up the sign. I say under the sign of the Southern Cross. It sounds like a Dio or a heavy
Yeah,
metal title.
Dio, definitely Dio. Yeah,
But the title is it's not just for show. That title. I mean, listeners might notice that it's not the Loch Ness monster. It's a Loch Ness monster, and I think the setting is coming into play in that title, the light of the Southern Cross. So I think what that title is telling us is like, yeah, there's a Loch Ness monster in the title, but is this a Loch Ness? Is this the Loch Ness monster? Is this a Loch Ness monster? And wait a minute, I thought that Loch Ness monster. I guess lake monsters are now more prevalent, but at least when I was a kid, the Loch Ness monster was very setting specific. It was very much Loch Ness in the UK.
yeah. Um, Now, the Loch Ness monster itself is it's not really in the story, but it is mentioned. Can you give us a short description of what this short story is about before we go into your reading, your excerpt?
Um, yeah, so yeah, it is mentioned. Um, it's a story. God, what is this story about? On the surface, the story is about our narrator reconnects in like a dark period of his life, just reconnects with an old childhood friend, and they just sort of uncover the mystery of what happened to the friend's dad. Her there's a bit of a romance going on between the two of them, and they decide to travel to find their missing father, who um, pretty much disappeared after the death of his son, and it is a very emotional thing. And that's where the Loch Ness monster comes into play, because there's a scene in the book where the two characters talk about this traumatic incident from their childhood, and they realize that the character's father, Lena's father, um, was from Scotland, and all the kids knew that he had seen the Loch Ness monster and that he had believed in it, and that's how there's this um, one level of the cryptid. One of the big three cryptids. It is cryptid month, or cryptid read along month, and we've got. I think we've got all three covered now. We did talk about Bigfoot. We're going to
Yeah,
hit the Loch Ness monster, and maybe we'll touch on a little bit of Yeti before we make our escape.
yeah,
Those were the big three when I was a kid.
yeah. What before we get into your story, one thing I really loved about this story and a lot of your stories, especially your short stories, um, although that now I think about it, that's the majority of what I've read from you. But is the dialogue between characters. I really love the dialogue in this story.
Thank you so much. Um, I appreciate it. Yeah, I guess for those playing along with the in the I won't read that section, but there is a cryptid. There is a cryptid in the story. What I'm going to read is more of the setup. Is we won't really get to the cryptid, but yeah, it'll be up to the reader to decide what the cryptid is, even though it is tangentially named. And I'm glad you mentioned dialogue. There is a point in the story where our character does have dialogue with this creature, and yeah, maybe it's a little bit different than the dialogue that you expect.
All right.
That's the end, but that's a good setup. I'm going to read from the beginning of the story.
All right, here we go.
A Loch Ness monster under the light of the Southern Cross. Stan Creek District, Belize. Once you're done with the sense of loss and the loneliness and the pain and range of emotions you go through, there is something freeing about not mattering at all, about being no one's number one in this world. It's a release from all the twists and turns, the patterns you find yourself in, all the things of your own making and otherwise holding you in place. Time helps. Some days you still wake up raw and hollow, not from your most recent loss or from any one thing, but from the weight of it all. Lena doesn't see this. How could she? Some cuts are too fresh. There are only a couple of huts here, and ours is perfect. Stark and empty, a clean slate, the sky, the sea, the jungle, the flowers providing all the color and sound and beautiful things I could want around me. An elderly lady dressed for a flight back to New York is clamoring about the manatee that has surfaced in one of the sinkholes on the property, and Lena isn't even interested in looking. I tell the Belizean guy renting us a Jeep that we're headed to Ihaka's down near Placencia, and he says, just make sure you don't go to the unfinished condos next door. Why? I ask. Rough parking? He shrugs. Everybody knows it's the one place you don't go. The elderly lady stops directing her even more elderly and dazed-looking husband, who's rolling their luggage, and chimes in. Oh, darling, we went past it on our way back from the ruins. Such a shame. It has so much potential. Sleek buildings, clean lines. Our driver told us it was built by a drug dealer, so now no one wants to buy it and finish the job. Didn't he say something about a shootout and a suicide? They're such a lovely couple, dear. Don't rain on their parade. Love, let me tell you about this place where we had breakfast. Perfect for you lovebirds. We're not a couple, Lena replies, flatly. Like me, she never fit in. With dark eyes and light tan from her Polynesian side and a smooth, clear complexion from her father's Scottish side, she was always too beautiful to be teased. Mostly, I remember her as simply present, a lot like now. Her brother was the one who drew the spotlight. There isn't a touch of gray in her long black ponytail, only a sheen from the sun, and barely a wrinkle on her, unlike so many of the people we went to school with. We were visiting her father, I say with a smile. I've known them since I was a kid. We aren't interesting enough, and we've lost the woman's attention to the task of getting her bags into the airport van. I can't help seeing the vast emptiness in her husband's eyes. That, and something about the way he stands, says he's lost. He's just along for the ride. Despite paying enough attention to know the drug deal shootout story, he's not really here at all. It's the same with Lena. I don't think she liked hearing her brother's name out loud. I feel the distance between us and between me and everyone. I had hoped for otherwise, but the feeling is nothing new. In the uncomfortable silence, I hear the ocean murmuring from not far away, the din of all living things in the trees, and the call and replies of birds that sound nothing like home. We hop in the Jeep, top and doors off, and I gun it. The heat doesn't seem to bother her, nor the bumpy road. She smells like alcohol, and I hope I wasn't wrong about pegging her for being a good traveler. In the fun little airport bar in Belize City, waiting for our puddle jumper, she was enthusiastic about the green cocktails in martini glasses made with Paisang liqueur. She talked about the war and the stock market with a young couple traveling with their adorable Pekingese. All good signs. Glad to be here, I say. She only gives a nod. I immediately wish I hadn't spoken. When someone's mind is in a maze, there's not a lot you can do to lead them out. How long does it take to communicate the events of decades gone by, the scale of disappointments, a day, a week, even after everything that scarred and didn't heal. I never lost sight of the fact that the world was full of love. I never felt the need to escape. Despite countless ghosts and memories in so many of my everyday places, I never felt the suburban streets were harsh or ugly or even painful anymore. No sharp edges. Things just became worn and acquired an ever present weight, unnoticeable on most days, at least the good ones. I was feeling that benign numbness yesterday when I reconnected with Lena. The road's two lanes carve a path through an incomprehensible mass of wild greenery and trees on either side. I like the heat and the wind. Lena produces an airplane sized liqueur bottle. I have no idea where from. And she downs it. In the second my eyes are on her, someone darts into the road. I swerve and manage to keep the Jeep off the muddy ditch of a shoulder and moving forward. Lena doesn't appear phased, so I guess she's all right. More people emerge from the jungle. They're carrying something above them, something big. A dead crocodile. It's huge. They're walking with it in some sort of procession. Belizeans and expats, a couple of dozen people from all walks of life. I slow to a halt to let them safely cross the road. Hey, honk for us, one of them calls. Lena reaches over and smashes the horn to their delight. A couple of young men jump on our hood and slap our windshield and give the thumbs up. What's going on? I say over the engine and the people. I can hear they are singing something mournful. We got him. This is a salty that took the Johnson's kid, Sarita. A shirtless American guy with long dreads and a baby face tells me. We watch them cross and disappear to the other side. Maybe heading for the beach, I guess. I notice some monkeys in one of the big strangler figs in the tangle of trees, just sitting there in a bough, eating fruit and watching too. They got that thing in the jungle? Lena asks. Maybe in one of the underground rivers or sinkholes. This whole area is connected that way. I get us moving, and before long, we've reached what I think are the condos. There's a gateway and long drive that looks like it belongs in Beverly Hills or New Jersey, leading past a moat, like canals circling in place. The canals and uniformity of the rows of white buildings evoke every gated community in Florida I've ever seen. The road veers right, and a big painted wooden sign comes into view. Ihaka's. Draped in Christmas lights, it no doubt cannot be missed at night. I roll into the dirt patch of clear jungle that is a parking lot and line the Jeep up with a dozen or so cars there. New and mostly clean, rentals like ours. A few paces inside the tree line, I can see the wall-less bar, the bamboo struts and thatch, and two shelves of liquor beneath the taxidermy crocodile, exactly the same as we saw it on the TV in 7-Eleven. And there's Lena's dad, shaking a metal shaker, right out of my childhood memory. Same dark glasses and all, not looking like he's aged much. He's in a loose-fitting dark dress shirt and slacks, not the plain gray suits I remember when I used to watch him walk from his car to his front door when arriving home from work. I hadn't put eyes on him since the days the Smiths broke up and left us holding tickets to their show at the Ritz. His son's name on the big sign and Lena's tense stare leave no doubt it's him, as if there were any question. You okay? I ask Lena. She says. Let's get a drink. We take seats at the bar. Her dad's still tall and skinny and pasty white. Up close, I see there are wrinkles on his forehead and dark patches under his eyes. Lena catches his attention and orders. I see you've got Midori. Good. 2 melon balls. Extra vodka for me. Hold the pineapple juice for him. For a second, I'm clueless. Then I remember it was Ihaka's drink, just the way he liked it. He loved those godforsaken concoctions and didn't give a flying fuck if any of his jock teammates rousted him for drinking a girly drink. Lena's dad puts a plain brown square of a napkin in front of each of us. 2 melon balls, got it, coming right up. He turns, grabs 2 highball glasses from the hanging rack, and begins fixing the drinks. Forget about me. How can it be that he doesn't recognize her? Fuck this, we're out of here, Lena says, and is on her feet. And it's been how long? But not recognizing your own daughter? Lena marches to the Jeep. I don't dare say a word. Keys, she says. I throw them to her and hop in the side. How dare he use Hawk's name, she says as we roll past the sign. She peels out, and we're back heading north. She brings the Jeep to a dangerous speed, then slams on the brakes. She backs up right on the road and turns into the condos. Here? I say. I want to see this fucking place, she says. It looks abandoned. It is abandoned, nothing to see. She parks up against the big gate and gets out of the Jeep. There's an access door that isn't padlocked, and it swings right open. I follow her. The path to the row of finished houses is flanked by a canal. The water is clean and flowing, looks like rain runoff draining to somewhere. Hurricane and flood protection, just like Florida, I guess. The canal circles the development and weaves in and out of the buildings. They're a bit weathered, but look unused, unfurnished. No personalized accoutrements that I can discern until I see a little red light in an unscreened window. A trail cam. Its black housing does not look weathered at all. What the fuck? Lena is at the last house in the row before a big building at the edge of the jungle. She pulls the door open. Of course it isn't locked. She steps inside and I hurry over. This one is lived in for sure. There's one wall of books, another with ceiling-to-floor shelves full of bottles, all different shapes and sizes and colors. There isn't one, alcohol or otherwise, that I've ever seen before. I don't like this. We should get out of here. You're right, she says. We go back outside. Instead of turning to leave the compound the way we came, she walks toward the big building and takes the path into the jungle. I see sinkholes flanking the path where it runs under trees. Careful, I call. There could be a croc or something. She doesn't stop. I contemplate whether I should hang back and give her space or follow. I check out the large building. I wonder if it was a gym or a common area. It has big glass windows. Maybe a greenhouse? They're all steamed and it's fogged up in there. Not one of them has been broken. I follow Lena into the trees. A couple of 100 yards in, I find her sitting at the edge of a large sinkhole. There are no trees above. The sun is going down. It smells like summer. The surface of the perfectly clear water captures a reverse image of the vine-wrapped trees and their countless shades of brown and the lush green fronds and ferns and saplings all mixed in with the rocky side of the sinkhole disappearing into the earth. As I walk over to sit next to her, I startle a foot-long brown lizard with a triangular crest. Rear toes spread wide, it dashes across the surface of the water, its long tail disturbing the water lilies. As it crosses the center point, its scales shimmer white and pink and green in the sunlight before it disappears onto the opposite bank. I notice petite white flowers on one of the vines creeping around a robust gumbo-limbo tree. And there aren't any mosquitoes. I can see why the little town was built here. This is a paradise. Lena downs another airplane bottle of rum. I know that sucked, I say. It's okay to be triggered. I'm not triggered. In the quiet of our silence, there is the rustle of the air moving the canopy, the din of sounds radiating from the leaves and branches akin to the buzz of New York cicadas, yet wholly new and alien. There's a back and forth of bird calls so full about their business that I am certain that this is their world, and we are the interlopers. After a few minutes, she gives a solid poke to my shoulder and points to the water. What? I say. She shushes me, puts her finger over her mouth, and then whispers, What the fuck is that? Where? There, right in the middle. I ease myself to my feet. I don't see anything, I whisper. There's only the crystal clear water. Not even a ripple. She can't hide her disappointment and stares at me as if I'm crazy. I have the feeling this expression is one I would know well should the trajectories of our lives keep us together after this. It is the reciprocal of her sated face, the one I saw seconds from sleep and still flushed with heat in my bed last night. Her disheveled hair transforming my pillow to a thing of beauty. While I told her things were not only going to be all right, they were going to be amazing. It's been one hell of a long day, an upsetting day, and she's probably a little drunk, dehydrated. It was only yesterday I decided to roll by my childhood home on my way back from the grocery store to feel something, to feel anything besides a ghost haunting the places that had sprung up over the decades and the places I once knew. I would have never have guessed I'd find myself here today with her, feeling alive again, just like that. It's still feeling so lost. And that's the end of the first section of the story. I'll stop it there.
All right, another great reading. Thank you so much.
Thank
Um,
you.
you know, when the when the people come out with the giant crocodile, I when I first read that, I was like, oh no, I had this reoccurring image from another short story of yours, and this one here,
Ah,
the shark, the giant shark that they do
oh
move
yeah,
into,
yeah,
and then I was like, oh no, they're gonna do it to the crocodile now.
yeah, yeah. That's rough. That's a rough scene, and yeah, when they hurt that shark.
And the story in
Thanks
that, if
for thanks
anyone
for.
wants to check it out, is how to stay afloat when drowning. It's a great story. This is a great collection too.
Ah, thanks, Jason.
So, I want to know what was the genesis behind a Loch Ness monster?
It's no pun intended, or perhaps pun intended. It was a twisting journey to publication for this one. I was originally approached um, to write a story for an anthology with the theme being labyrinths. And um, immediately I came up with a lot of ideas for labyrinths, and I don't think any of them were physical. I wanted to think of so the original genesis was a labyrinth, a non-physical labyrinth. So I was thinking a labyrinth of time. So I just wanted to write a story that the relevant pieces of it took place in different parts of time, and then of course a Loch Ness monster like creature came came into play, and um, then all the other things came into play. So that original Labyrinth anthology never happened, but it got picked up and morphed into A Darkness Visible because it was the same publisher. So yeah, it'd be the original idea, or the original inspiration for the story was playing with the idea of a labyrinth.
Awesome. Now, how long? Like this story seemed like it might have been. I don't know, but to me, it seemed like it would have been difficult to write. How long did it take for you to write this one?
I wrote this during the pandemic, so I think it in terms of my process, which I'm a really slow writer, and sometimes my stories can take a really long time. I think this was one that came pretty fast,
Oh,
and I went on and on about saying how I hate my first drafts, and it's always the hardest part. This was one that I felt like, wow, this wasn't so painful the first draft, and I felt the first draft was, in terms of my yardstick, was pretty good. So maybe I think it was like maybe an aberration for me on that.
I really kind of like the back and forth. That's sort of time that that goes on in the story because there is a little bit of that was then, this is now going on. Is that difficult to write?
Um, I I Probably. I mean, I want to say yes, but I also don't want to dissuade anyone. I mean, I think it was called for. It was the idea of the story. So I think rather than saying it's difficult to write, I think it comes with certain anything other than a linear formal narrative just comes with certain risks. You know, I mean, you have to. Um, it's just got to work. You know, is it difficult to do? If you do it wrong, I guess so, right? And I'm not, and that's not an egotistical thing to say. I think stories have to be what they are. But as someone who I like to play with stories and I like to write non-traditional, or I guess like this was a postmodern thing, the risk is maybe some readers aren't going to come along for the ride, or if you don't really do your job right and you're not. I think both in stories that are time displaced and stories that I tend to write, the Twilight Zone, nighttime logic things, they just come with the risks that some readers are just going to look at it with a blank stare, and that's on me, or it's just, or that's on the story.
You describe yourself as, and we've talked about this before, but you describe yourself as a strange fiction writer, and that comes from Robert Aikman. Um, One thing I really enjoy about your stories is how they're deeply rooted in reality, but there's something wrong with reality,
Mm.
and I love that. Like, how are you able to do that so subtly?
I'm not sure, but I think having the intent to do so is part of it. Um, and at least for me, maybe part of it goes back to the process. I like to, before I write the story, and maybe this was why my first drafts are getting easier or better meaning more readable to humans, not apes. um, in recent years or decades, I like to be able to have the story, if not finished, be able to tell it to either myself or to tell it to you, be able to tell it to someone before I start writing it. And the reason I'm saying that is not that I propose that for anyone, but the benefit of that process is that things are figured out before I go on the page. So I think and it's okay to be a pants writer, figure it out as you go along. There's nothing wrong with that. But I feel like for the kind of writing that I'm doing, where I want to have a story that will have perhaps two or more different possibilities. In this one, in the Loch Ness Monster, I want it to be, um, yeah, two very distinct possibilities on what that ending means, or two very distinct explanations as to people could be like, what did they just see? And I want both of them to be supported by the story, so like both people can be right or both people can be wrong. And at least for me, it's at least figuring out and choosing what I'm going to show the reader before I write it, and then the rest of it is just hope that it works. You know,
Yeah.
at least at least get it where it works for me, and then yeah, and hope that it means something, or hope that the same reaction comes from a reader.
Yeah, I like that. Hope that it works because
Yeah,
I think that's what every writer hopes when they're
yeah,
going through that first draft. Like, God, I hope this
yeah,
works.
yeah. I I, I am one of those for sure.
Oh, I only have a few more or a couple more questions here before we go. Now, I might be remembering wrong, and I hope not, because it would be embarrassing. No, I'm just joking. But I remember that you were working on a novel. And is that true? And if so, how is it going?
Yeah, it's going well. Um, yeah, that was a novel. It's called Servant of the Eighth Wind, and it's picked up by Lev Press. And yeah, it's done. I've had just some constraints on my time and my health, so my very patient publisher is just waiting for my revisions to come in, which is probably the same answer. You know, it's been a long time coming, but I hope it's going to be real worth it when you guys get to see it, which I think is a lot. We're a lot closer to that.
Can you tell us a little bit at least about what it's about?
Yeah, surprise, surprise! It's set in that same part of the world. It's It is a continuation. I mentioned the short story Across the Darien Gap earlier in the program, and it is the same character from Across the Darien Gap. So, in many ways, a short form way of saying it is that short story is subsumed by the novel, so that story is part of the novel. So I guess we get to see a little bit before that story, and we see that short story continue. But it is a cat and mouse. It's a thriller. It's like a supernatural. That character, whose name is Nate, he's a supernatural detective of sorts, sort of a loser, private eye noir detective, and he has a mission that has just gone south, that's gone wrong, and he's just in Central America, and he's on the run, and that's the novel.
That sounds like it might be fun.
I hope so. Let's see if it works.
Now, do you think is this your first attempt at a novel?
um, I'm not sure. I mean, I think I have a lot. It's definitely my going to be my first, and I'm flubbing all this because, um, I guess a novel technically is 30,000 words or more. So the
Hmm.
Serpent Shadow is like in the 29,000s. So I think even on, so some places are calling the Serpent Shadow a novel. Like even on the back of the book, they're calling it a novel. So maybe it's my first one. Maybe it's not, depending on
Yeah, but I ask
depending
because
on what counts.
you're primarily known for being a short story writer. You have like three or four collections out, and your novella or
Yeah.
novel, "The Serpent's Shadow." But I'm wondering, like, let's just say it's 50 years from now, and both of us are long gone. Um, how do you think people are going to remember you? Are you going to be sort of like Robert Aikman, where he has like four or five collections out, and I think he had a novel out too that wasn't quite as strange. But are you going to be that? Or are you going to like switch to novels and start pumping out the novels like Stephen King? Or
Let's go with all the above, right? Can I pump out novels like Stephen King, and can you give me his bank account?
I
And
guess we all wish we could do that, right?
yeah, right. You know, it'd be more so. I'd love to be remembered. Stephen King is remembered or is known as Uncle Steve, and he just does great things for people. And if I could be remembered for anything, I would hope that it would be, for being a good guy or for being a force for help. But I see your question. I'm never going to abandon the short stories. I love them too much. I love short stories. I love short story collections. I love anthologies. I love being part of anthologies. So I'm never going to stop doing short stories. If people like my novels and I can continue to sell them, then I'll probably put that in there too, because ultimately I'm a fan of storytelling, and I'm a fan of making the story be the right size. And if you have like a novel size idea, there's only so many novels a human can write, unless you're Stephen King, or even then, there's only so many ideas. And I think, yeah, I'm just more primed to go with those short stories rather than like invest the time in a novel size idea and then maybe have a novel that's not going to get out there or not. But knock on wood, I hope I'll be able to continue doing both. But I'm never gonna abandon the short story.
Excellent. So I
That's it.
really love your short stories.
Thank you.
Before I ask my last question, when I was looking up the story I was thinking of in this, there's a quote on here by the great Laird Barron, or a blurb, and I read it, and it's like, wow, you got this quote from Laird Barron, like awesome. And it reads, "Underworld Dreams contains a suite of tales that are tender, dangerous, and beguiling. Braum trades in fantastical imagery, yet his words are ever relatable to the human experience in all its splendor and melancholy." And I don't think anyone could wrap up what your work is like any better than that. And that's
Uh,
by Laird Barron. That's awesome.
yeah, thanks, Jason, and thank you to Laird. Yeah, Laird's such a tremendous talent, and also just really embodies that Stephen King spirit of just being a writer who just helps people. And Laird had, I think it's pretty well known that Laird had his own health scare. I think he's on the mend.
Yeah, we almost lost him.
We almost lost him. He's got new books out. So, yeah, I hope people can support Laird. I think he's just got, I know he's got maybe a new collection on the way, a new novel. He's got stuff. And Laird is tremendous talent. He's a master of our genre, and getting something by him is always going to delight you. So you know what to do.
Well, you are a master as well. I mean, that blurb from Laird Barron sums it up. And I
Well, I'm
want
really grateful to Laird for that. Thank you so much.
you're quite welcome. But I want to know, my last question here is, what can viewers and fans of your work, do you have any releases coming out that we can all look forward to?
Well, the most recent one, most recent two, we just talked about, A Darkness Visible and The Serpent Shadow, were the two, and I'm writing a bunch of short stories. Hopefully, the next things that'll be coming are get that novel into my publisher, and I'm also concurrently writing a bunch of short stories for anthologies that haven't been announced yet. So hopefully, I'll have some before long. I'll be able to answer that question and not get myself in trouble.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show again, Daniel. And you can come on, as I say, anytime, man. Just get in touch with
Yeah,
me.
I'd
And
love to come back anytime. I know you've got some things in the works, and it'd be a pleasure to come back and talk fiction with you. It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
all right, I want to thank you. This was a great show, and so we are going to end it here. But again, thanks to everyone, including you, Daniel, and we will catch you all next time.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Thanks, Jason.